So, thanks very much, Jonathan, and thanks to everyone for being here this morning and to listen to some of the things that I'm going to share with you in just a little bit. But in his introduction, he did talk about the fact that I was at multiple different institutions, academic institutions, over the last many years. Can everybody hear me, or do you want me to turn up the volume a little bit? Everybody can hear me in the back there too? Okay. But maybe I can put my classroom voice on and then turn up the volume a little bit. I've been at multiple institutions, and I'm glad that he didn't say that I have not been able to hold down a job for very long, because I've moved, in short order, I've moved to different places, and I never thought I was going to be where I am today, but that's another story, I guess, that you could invite me back, and I'll tell you, a lot of students particularly want to know, how do you end up being where you are, as an academic, and if the students that are interested, invite me back. I'd love to do that, about career choices, and how do you do what you do to prepare to where you might want to be as well. It's an interesting proposition in terms of careers as well. But this morning what I want to do is to tell you a little bit about my take, as it were, sort of a global perspective, about the idea that in just a few short years we're going to have this incredible population that's going to come down the pike on us, and that along with that very, very large population increase, we've got a much more significantly hotter environment that we're going to be in. And how do you deal with making sure that we're going to be putting food on the table for that particular population that's coming down the pike in that context of the changing environment that we've got? And oh, by the way, it's a flatter environment as well, in the sense that it is a global environment that we're operating in, and things that are, it's like the butterfly effect, chaos theory, that the butterfly that's flying in some tropical land, it's fluttering its wings, and the air starts vibrating, and it has an impact. It creates these tornadoes and things like that, many thousands of miles away. And it goes back to this chaos theory, as it were. And that's exactly what's happening, is because of this global context in which we live. We have to think, it's not just about the fact that, as Jim Trapp and I were discussing just a few minutes ago, is we have to worry about our own backyards, our own local scene, but we have to also think about it in the context of the broader community that we live in as well. And actually the title itself, the hotter, flatter, more crowded, some of you that have read Thomas Friedman, this is a columnist in the New York Times, he had a book here about coming on now 15 years with a title not unlike the one that I've got here. And what I'm going to do here this morning is, for you, I've set the table, as it were, and I've got a number of place settings, and those place settings deal with all of these interesting constraints that we've got to worry about of being able to put food on the table for this projected population. I'll share with you my take on the various constraints, both biotic and abiotic, the living and non-living things that we have to worry about. But along with that, what are some of the opportunities that we've got in the area of food waste, food loss, and farming systems, and very significantly what we should be concerned about in terms of policies and regulations and the sort of the human sciences enterprise that we need to be thinking of. And then I don't want to leave you with the sense that, oh my gosh, this is a terrible situation, woe is me, what are we going to do about this? But there are some interesting paths forward as well, as we're thinking about it. What are those transformative approaches that we need to be thinking of, developing as scientists, as educators, that we can indeed go ahead and come up with a path forward as we're thinking about where we want to go. So that's the context in which I'm going to set this table, and I'm going to take each one of these place settings and talk about that, and then finally finish it off with the path forward as well. So in all the conversations I'm sure you have, that I have, there does not go a day when we don't think of the societal challenges. It's the conversation is all around these societal challenges. And in my mind, these societal challenges are wicked problems. And our ag economist friends, they talk about wicked problems, and there are others that talk about this as well. But actually it was a guy who was a German national, his name was Horst Rittel, R-I-T-T-E-L, that came up with the term wicked problem. He was an industrial engineer back in the 60s and 70s in Germany. And he thought that there are a lot of issues that you may have the most fantastic technologies available to you, the most fantastic knowledge available to you, but you're not able to deploy it, in part because mere humans become involved, and humans cannot agree. And we all bump our heads, butt our heads, as it were, and you just cannot agree. And the consequence of that is nothing comes of it. And so it becomes a wicked problem. And to me, population, I call it the mother of all wicked problems, because it is population that is driving everything that we've got. And the reason I call population a wicked problem, in fact, here in America, when you're raised, you were told that you didn't talk about a couple of things at the dinner table. You didn't talk about politics and religion, because you could get into a really contentious debate about those two topics. So you don't talk about those topics at the dinner table. And population is another one of those topics that you don't talk about at the dinner table either, because there are religious connotations, there are superstitions associated with where babies come from. In many, many agrarian societies, you got to have more children because they're the ones that are going to go work in the fields with you. On and on. You got all these sorts of challenges that you've got. Plus, from a religious perspective, if you're a Catholic or a Hindu or a Muslim or a Mormon or whatever it is that your particular religion is, there are connotations that have an impact on the decisions that you make about whether you have more children or not. So that's really the mother of all wicked problems. In fact, the one country that thought that it had figured out how to deal with the population problem, China, how they did it was literally to hold a gun to your head and force you to have only one child. And that is only in the urban communities. If you lived out in the rural areas, you could have more than one child. But in urban communities, you could only have one child, and that was done forcibly. And then what happens is that they've discovered in the very recent past, in the last year or two now, they've come to realize that in the next generation, they're going to be an aging population, not unlike South Korea and Japan, that they're not getting enough young people to come in to replace the folks that are dying off. And in fact, in the Beijing Daily News back last fall, there was an editorial calling on the country, on China, to ease up on the one-child policy. So even China is stepping back from this proposition of controlling population. So population's off the table. It's the mother of all wicked problems. And derived from those, I like to call these baby wicked problems. These baby wicked problems literally are the result of population. Were it not for the fact that we're going to have this 9+ billion people, or were it not for the fact that we've got 7 billion people today that's utilizing all these resources, and that is contributing to climate change, that's contributing to all these interesting things that are going on, we would not have a problem. These baby wicked problems would solve themselves very easily. Okay, but there are also wicked problems. Climate change. In America, for example, we've got about half the population that does not believe that climate change is the result of human activities. Or about water, and particularly in western states in the United States, there are wars about water as to who determines who gets to use water first. In fact, in the Klamath Basin in Oregon, in southern Oregon, this year is the 5th or 6th year of droughts that they've had, to the point that only the ones that have water rights, the original water rights holders, get to use water. One of those first original water rights holders were the Modocs and the Klamaths, the Native American tribes that are located out there. They get first dibs at it. And then the Bureau of Land Reclamation gets second dibs on it. And then you're going to have farmers getting dibs on it too. So water is another very contentious challenge that we've got, that we cannot agree on how to go about utilizing these resources that we got. So that's why I like to call these societal challenges as wicked problems. So that gives you sort of the global context. And then when you narrow it down to the food systems challenges that we've got, the 21st century food systems challenges that you've got, in my mind, I think agricultural competitiveness is a very significant challenge. At the end of the day, we're going to have to make sure that institutions like this, these land-grant universities that we've got, the work that we end up doing, that our scientists and that our educators are doing, have to bear in mind at the core are the producers, the people that actually produce the food, the farmers and livestock producers that we've got. We got to worry about them. Look at America's situation. We have an aging farming population. The average age of the American farmer in the last agricultural census we discovered was about 57 years of age. We have an agricultural census that's going on right now, it'll tell us that, I bet you it'll tell us that the average age of the American farmer is about 60 years of age. It's a rapidly aging population. And this is true, by the way, in Africa, in Asia, in South America, in Australia, all of these parts of the world. We don't have enough young people to want to go into the agricultural enterprise because, you know, it's not, you know, you got to get up at 4 in the morning, deal with the poop, deal with the smell, and oh, by the way, your neighbors complain because you're, you know, if you're a dairy farmer, you're contributing to the release of house flies and biting flies and things like that. On and on and on. Then you got all these regulations you got to deal with, and you got all these policies that you got to deal with. On and on and on. Why would you want to go into the agricultural enterprise? So we, you and I, collectively have to be very concerned about making sure that we have young people to actually want to go in there. So what kind of education do we offer them? What kind of skills do we enable them with? What kind of research do we undertake? What kind of extension do we undertake that allows that farmer and that producer to be able to keep a few more dollars? You know, they live on the margins. If you were to be able to do something that allows them to keep a few more of those dollars, what kind of research would that be? What kind of, you know, it's not just about you and I in my former life, but you, Sam here in her life, in her new life now that she started a week ago, in her life that she's going to be publishing these papers and all these journals and all that. That's part of her academic requirement. But what is it there beyond that that makes sure that she's going to be enabling these farmers and livestock producers to be able to earn a living and that they're competitive as well? That's a huge challenge that we face, not just as a nation, but globally as well, in being able to set this table that we're thinking of. We don't have enough people that are ready and willing to actually go and raise those crops and raise those livestock. A second challenge that we've got is the ecological footprint itself. How do you mitigate that footprint to where it does not end up utilizing too many of the resources that we've got? And whether it's natural resource stewardship or water stewardship or land stewardship or climate change or whatever else you've got, you know, our nitrogen footprint, our water footprint, our climate footprint, on and on and on. All of these things, how do we figure out what kind of research needs to be done so it can be mitigated, you know, minimized to the greatest extent possible? As a challenge, if we can lick that challenge, we're going to be quite a ways out in being able to feed that population that's coming down the pike. A third area is the opportunities afforded us in the bioeconomy. I'm not talking about ethanol, the grain-based ethanol. You know, in fact, ethanol is a technology that humanity invented almost from the inception of the agriculture that we've practiced for the last 10 to 15,000 years. Almost from its inception. You know, you go back to the tombs of the pharaohs and go back to Mesopotamia and other places, and you look at the hieroglyphics and things like that. It tells us almost right from the beginning they knew how to make ethanol. I'm talking about, you know, unraveling the secrets in the green plant material that's going to allow us to be able to drive not just our automobiles and our airplanes, but also drive the DuPonts and the Dow Chemicals and others as well. What are those chemical feedstocks and what are the opportunities afforded us in being able to do that? And at the same time, feed the world as well. I think we're at a sort of a critical step of being able to pull that off as well. And there are some interesting challenges inherent in that. And last but not least is health. And indeed, you know, this relates to nutrition, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and things like that. We have a situation here in the United States that because of the excessive amounts of consumption of various types of calories that we consume and the lifestyle that we've got, the behaviors that we've got, it's contributing to the health challenges that we've got. And it's only getting worse. And the really, really sad part and the really bad part for us as a nation is in America, since about the 1800s, late 1800s, every succeeding generation has lived for a little bit longer than the preceding generation. To the extent that today, people that were born 50 years ago, 60 years ago, etc., can aspire to live to an age of about 80 years. But the children born in the year 2000, that decade of the 2000, that first decade of this new millennium, those children are going to have a shorter lifespan than their parents. Okay? There's something bad wrong with that scene that we have to be very, very concerned about. So at the end of all of this ideas about putting food on the table, we have to worry about these health challenges as well. So how do you make that happen is an interesting proposition for us to ponder as agricultural scientists. So the proposition then is we're going to have this huge population of 9+ billion, And you know, projections are it's going to land somewhere between 9 and 10 billion people in just another 30 to 40 years. And there's a number of young people sitting in this room. And Sam, whom I met here just recently, she's going to be about my age probably. I'm 61 years of age, and not even that, if that. She's going to be making those decisions at that time in the year 2040, 2050, when we're going to have this population that's coming along. And the proposition is we're going to feed that population, we're going to provide the shelter, we're going to clothe them. Oh, by the way, we're going to also let them drive their automobiles, drive their airplanes, drive their DuPonts and Dow chemicals and things like that. All of this is going to happen. That's the proposition. And we're going to tie your hands behind your back. We're going to tie Samantha's and other people's hands behind their back, because we're going to throw at you, Samantha, climate change. We're going to throw at you land and water constraints. You know, the increasing urbanization. In America, we're 80% urbanized now. The same spot that allows us to grow this amazing food is also the same spot where you want to locate your best cities as well. You need water, you need good land, and in fact, where the cities have been established over the millennia as humans took on agriculture and became more sedentary is along bodies of water, along those deltas. That's where it's at. So there are competing interests here. These competing interests are having an impact. Then we're going to throw at you environmental degradation, and we want to say, we want you to make sure that your ecological footprint is reduced. Oh, by the way, there's going to be these changing incomes and diets. Already we see that. Look at China and India and countries in Africa with increasing occurrence of the middle class, as it were, the expectation and the requirement, and what's happening on the ground is they're changing their diets, because now they want more animal protein. They want to have 2 cars in the garage. They want to have 5 televisions in the home. They want to have just all the things that you and I have wanted and have had. That's exactly what everybody else wants as well. And these are all competing for these natural resources that we've got. In order to make that television set, you need more fossil fuels. In order to make that automobile, you need more fossil fuels. And if you're diverting it to fossil fuels to make more automobiles, more televisions, you can't make that much more nitrogen fertilizer. If you don't have that much more nitrogen fertilizer, you can't be putting that as fertilizer for raising your crops. I mean, these are the competing interests that we've got. So we're going to tie her hands behind her back and tell her, you're going to feed this population, but this is what's going to happen to you. And at the end of it all, oh, by the way, I want positive health outcomes to come out of this as well, because I want people to live a healthy, long life. So that's the proposition that we've got, and hands are tied behind our back. That's the context that gives you interestingly, it's a daunting challenge to think of as you're thinking, projecting out on how this could come about. What are we doing right now? What might ought to happen right now as we're going? And along with these challenges, these propositions, and these hands tied behind your back situations that we've got, we also say this is all going to have to be sustainable. Okay? That we want to make it so that our children and our children's children and on and on and on, they're going to be able to inherit this wonderful thing called life on Earth. Okay? That's another thing that we have to be worried about as well, in terms of making sure that everything that we do is done in a sustainable context. And so how do you take all of these different things, the health and energy and climate and water and food, and put it all into this gamish of this blender that you've got, and out of it comes out all these positive outcomes, and it's all going to be sustainable as well. Again, it gives you the sense that, wow, this is pretty dang daunting to think about. Okay? Now I'm going to throw at you a little more. I'm going to drill down further. So you got the global challenges, you got the agricultural and food systems challenges, then you got the challenges of these constraints that we've got, and then we got the challenges of sustainability that we require of you. And then we've got some drilling down, some specifics about some biotic constraints that we've got, which also, by the way, offer us some opportunities as we're thinking about it as well. It's the sort of the half full, half empty type of a system that we've got, whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. When you look at these sorts of constraints that I'm going to drill down into, you might be able to think of some interesting propositions as an educator, as a scientist as well. So, a lot of biotic constraints that we've got. Just think about the diversity of species. By the way, this is about plants. It doesn't include the animals, but I dare say that animals might be in a similar situation as well. Out of about the 50,000 edible species that we've got, that humanity, by trial and error, figured out are edible, can sustain life, all of us across the world, it doesn't matter, we're scrunched it down to just about a dozen or so species. In fact, literally, it's rice, wheat, corn, and soybeans are the ones that all of us, it doesn't matter what part of the world you are. I was raised and grew up in India. I grew up as a rice eater. And people that grew up in Mesoamerica would grow up as corn eaters. And people that grew up in Syria and the Fertile Crescent, the Levant as we call it, would have grown up eating wheat, right? But today, everybody around the world eats all of these things. There's an expectation that Samantha's going to get up in the morning, winter or summer, pardon me, I'm going to pick on you a little bit here, use you as my example of a person that needs to be doing these things. Gets up in the morning and says, winter or summer, it doesn't matter, fall, I need to have blueberries because somebody told me that it's good for my health. I'm going to eat those blueberries. And those blueberries, you know, we grow them in America, of course, we do, in places like Oregon and Michigan and Florida and places like that. But by the way, in the wintertime, it comes to us from Chile or from New Zealand. Okay? We expect these things to happen, so we're going to have to move these things back and forth. And there's an expectation. So that's the reason why we've got this incredible specialization almost that's taking place in the world. There's just a handful of species that we all consume. Across the globe, any place you go to today, you'll be able to eat rice, wheat, corn, strawberries, blueberries, etc. Just a handful of species that you've got. It doesn't matter what part of the world you're in. And so there's something bad wrong with that. Right? I mean, what's the possibility that the plant scientist sitting here might be thinking, well, what else is there about these other edible species that might be even more healthy, might be able to deal with climate change, with droughts, and on that might be developed. In terms of all these different traits that we've got, I'm not going to say a whole lot about these other things. They're all self-explanatory. But this whole thing about yield stabilization. Right? In the good old days when I studied plant breeding and genetics, I was taught that you need to really look at GXE, the genes times the environment interactions. That's all I was taught. But then we realized if you go to what are called as top farmers in the Midwest, like if you go to Illinois or Iowa or Indiana or someplace like that, you've got two farmers that are neighboring farmers, and one farmer with the same genetics, with the same amount of water, the same environmental conditions, etc., produces 350 bushels of corn per acre. And then you got that neighbor who's only able to produce about 150 to 175 bushels of per acre. What is it about this top farmer who's able to produce 2 times as much corn with the same amount of investments that are going into it? It is that M part of it, the management part of it, the sort of the je ne sais quoi that individual is doing, you know. What's the possibility, like in the Matrix, you know, you're able to go ahead and stick a probe into that individual's brain and download all that information and then upload it into that neighboring farmer's. Well, we have a system like that. We call that Cooperative Extension Service. That's what extension allows us to do, is to be able to go ahead and tap into the knowledge base of this group of individuals, translate that, and then deliver it to this other group as well. And what is it about that GXEXM that we need to be thinking of? So if we can produce 2 times as much, get 2 times as much productivity per unit of investment of whatever it is, that's an unbelievable opportunity for us. In fact, the projections are with this 9+ billion people, we need to be doubling our food production as well, with diminishing land resources and water resources and things. In fact, there's a guy named Jason Clay. He's with the World Wildlife Federation. Jason did an analysis about 3 years ago that said, based on today's knowledge that we've got, today's technology right now, we need 2 more Earths to feed that population in the year 2050. And he says in the same article, oh, by the way, if you want to live like an American, you need 4 more Earths to feed that population at that time. And in fact, everybody around the world is aspiring to be just like America and Americans, as a matter of fact, right? And so we have a really interesting challenge ahead of us. Okay, another area is, you know, one of the opportunities afforded us in systems biology and synthetic biology. How is that going to be accepted? You know, we have this unbelievable challenge, even with genetically modified crops. Can you imagine if somebody comes along and creates a synthetic whatever, a plant or a critter or whatever? Craig Venter, some of you know that name. He competed against the United States government in deciphering the human genome. Craig Venter has a company that 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, created a synthetic chromosome that works just like the natural chromosome. In fact, they've even created some synthetic microorganisms that do everything that the, in quotes, the natural ones do. And would people be willing? Remember the Frankenfoods conversations we had around the world, you know, thanks to Prince Charles of England. And imagine unleashing a plant that's been synthetically developed. While we talk about synthetic wheats and all these different sorts of things that we've got, the possibility of creating those designer genes that could be put into. Imagine the possibilities of being able to do that. And how do we bring people along as well? Because humans do indeed matter, and they need to be brought along with a better level of understanding and knowledge as well. Another thing that we might want to think of is, you know, the cisgenics versus transgenics. There's this gut instinct reaction across the world that there's something bad wrong with transgenics. The data that we've got for the last at least about 15 years in America and around the world says there's nothing absolutely positively wrong with consuming genetically modified crops. There's nothing at all. And but there's a certain level of comfort if you said it comes from within the same species. And in the area of cisgenics, where you're transferring genes from one organism to another but within the same species rather than transgenically, I think, again, we've just barely scratched the surface in what cisgenics can allow us to do. And it's much more palatable to the average consumer as well. In the area of photosynthesis, C4 versus C3 photosynthesis. C4 photosynthesis, the example of that are plants like corn and sorghum. And an example of a C3 photosynthetic plant is rice. A corn plant, for the same amount of sunlight, nitrogen, carbon, water, produces 2 times as much photosynthate as a rice plant does. Imagine if we were to be able to understand how C4 photosynthesis occurs and that knowledge is transferred into rice. Now suddenly you can produce rice on half the amount of land and reduce the water that's used, reduce the amount of methane that's produced, because rice is grown in paddies in Asia, and that methane is 4 times as detrimental as a greenhouse gas as carbon is. You would reduce the amount of nitrogen that's being used as fertilizer. Nitrogen, by the way, is 300 times as detrimental as carbon as a greenhouse gas. Imagine the possibilities of understanding and the transformative knowledge that we need and the technology that we can go ahead and incorporate into other species as well. It gives you a sense of the kinds of things that we need to, that we've been scratching at the surface, we're not making that progress. We need young people to step up and think outside of the proverbial box and to provide us the capabilities that we need as well. I'll talk a little bit more about this pre- and post-harvest losses in just a little bit. So that gives you a sense of some of the biotic constraints that we've got. Then the abiotic constraints that we need to think of. You know, soil depletion. You go around the world, even in America, this is happening, but Africa really epitomizes the situation that we've got. East Africa. You've got, the soil's been so badly depleted there, you can't grow anything in it. It's like, becomes sterile. You can't grow anything into it. How do you remediate it? What might you be doing from the transformative knowledge that we need that can go ahead and help remediate that? Greenhouse gases and climate change. You know, everybody is hip to this, but there's this hidden thing that we don't talk a lot about that's hanging in the air literally, is aerosols. And, you know, everybody says, oh yeah, you know, greenhouse gases are things related to nitrogen, carbon, methane, et cetera, et cetera. These are the ones that are going and doing this, this whole thing about the effect of greenhouse gases that raises the temperature on the Earth's surface, and you got all these other attendant things going on, just like within a greenhouse itself. But these aerosols, you know, the light blue right here coming off the oceans, these are salts that are being aerosolized. And all these green things that you've got here are all from forest fires that are taking place, that's soot and carbon that's being aerosolized into the atmosphere. And these things right here, this is where much of the agriculture takes place. That's where dust is being kicked up. Remember the Dust Bowl days in the United States back in the 1930s and 1940s. Dust is being kicked up. These white things here, these are volcanic emissions that you're getting, sulfur and other things. And these are particulates, not gases. And what these particles are doing is they're going up into the atmosphere And instead of the solar radiation that comes through and then gets much of it reflected back out, now that's being trapped by that, like an umbrella effect. You got an umbrella of these aerosolized particulates in the environment, in the atmosphere. And so it's exacerbating the effect of the greenhouse gases. Back a few years ago, some of you remember there's this thing called geoengineering. We're going to shoot up into the atmosphere particles that would go ahead and serve like an umbrella to prevent solar radiation from coming through. So it's like an umbrella, it's reflecting it back out. But they figured out that that thing was very transient. Yeah, you did get an effect, but it was a transient effect. It cooled down for a tad bit, but then it disappeared because those particles disappeared. But these particles, they hang around, they stay in the environment, and we're constantly spewing these things out, constantly. So they're being replenished. They may disappear, but new stuff is coming along. So what are the agricultural practices that we incorporate that mitigates the production of these particles in the environment? You know, look at this. We have come quite a ways. In fact, we do, you know, post the Dust Bowl days, we developed some interesting approaches to production agriculture. We do no-till production systems today in the United States. That's really mitigated the occurrence of these dust particles in the atmosphere. That's had a huge impact. But in the rest of the world, you know, there's not only is that topsoil being lost, like was lost here in the States, but it's also, you know, exacerbating the impact of climate change as well on the environment. Temperature increases. These greenhouse gases, these aerosolized materials, these particles in the atmosphere and things like that are contributing to higher temperatures occurring. And the World Bank put out a report last fall that says that at 4 degrees centigrade increase, and this is definitely possible in just another 50 to 75 years, based on projections looking at the temperature on Earth. 4 degrees centigrade increase will result in crop failures, malnutrition. That's in plants. Animal scientists, we know very little about the impact, about what temperature increases are going to do. We have a little bit of knowledge about, you know, dairy cattle and things like that, but in general, we don't have the physiological understanding of the impact of these increasing temperatures. Desperately need this sort of knowledge to be developed. And this is a busy slide, but basically the bottom line message is as temperatures go up, yields start going down. Okay? It doesn't matter what altitude you're at or longitude you're at, but basically in wheat, in maize, in wheat, in rice, it's all going down with increasing temperature. These are, you know, increased increments of 1 degree centigrade increase at beyond a certain optimal temperature. That's what's going on. So we need, you know, we need to figure out more. I mean, there's a lot of interactions as well. You know, University of Illinois has this place called soy phase. They're looking at the interactions between carbon and temperature and different types of species of plants. There are some species that handle it beautifully. It's like saying, bring it on, I'll make more of whatever it is that I'm making. So going back to that diversity of species that we grow, should we continue to be relying only on these handful of species, or are there other things that we might ought to be doing as well? As we're thinking about this, setting this table in this environment that we're thinking. Water quality. You guys are right smack dab in the middle of the Ogallala Aquifer. And that thing is being depleted very, very quickly. And in fact, to the extent that in the Panhandle, in Oklahoma, and Texas as well, you know, farmers have to put meters on the Ogallala Aquifer on the amount of water that's being used. So what kind of research is needed in that area, for example? In terms of, there's some research going on looking at winter runoff being used to recharge those aquifers and then discharge it in the summertime for production agriculture. Or should we even be growing corn in places that we shouldn't be? Maybe we should be growing milo, you know, sorghum, for those of you that don't know milo. So we should be growing sorghum. Wheat, these things take a lot less water. Okay, but corn, well, it's dropped precipitously, the price. I don't know if you've been paying attention to this. Corn was at $7 a bushel just a month ago. I think 2 days ago I saw it had dropped down to $4.30. And I don't know what's going on, but all the commodity prices have been dropping down very, very rapidly. But when corn's at $7 a bushel, you know what? If you're a producer, you're going to start growing corn. And it doesn't matter. You're going to go ahead and pull that water rat and do overhead sprinkling. And Much of that water is lost in that overhead sprinkling as well. And those are some of the challenges that we have to think about. And Klamath Basin, back in the good old days, 15 years ago, this is true of Punjab as well in India. In the good old days, 15, 20 years ago, if you were a farmer, you were allowed to drill a well. You could get water, high pressure, good sweet water, at about 150 to 300 feet. Today, you got to drill down to 3,000 feet. And what's happened is in Bangladesh and other countries, when you go that deep, you start pulling up some interesting heavy metals coming out of it as well. So, you know, more arsenic that's coming in, more other things that are coming in that have an impact on the quality of the food that you're going to be producing as well. So at 3,000 feet versus 300 feet, the amount of energy needed to move that water an order of magnitude higher and then get that water out to where you need to, the energy needed is unbelievable. And when you talk about energy, to produce that energy, you're burning fossil fuels. When you're burning fossil fuels, you're aggravating production of, or increasing production of greenhouse gases. When you do that, you're causing climate change and, you know, droughts and extreme weather events. And when you do that, you need more water. So you're going to pull more water out. See the sort of the interesting challenge that we have in being able to get this food out and water out to be able to grow the crops and raise the livestock. This is a graphic globally of the water stress that we have. And this spot right here is where the bulk of the world's food is produced. Serious water stress in that area. And the drought severity, amazing. It's pretty much across the globe that we've got severity of droughts that are hitting us. And how do you go ahead and start thinking of the kind of crops that we need? What kind of transformative things do we need in drought tolerance, in water use efficiency, in nitrogen use efficiency, and on, you know, whether it's cattle or goats or chickens or sheep or crops or whatever it is. That's what's going to be driving the kind of research that we need, the kind of education that we need as well. In fact, you know, people say, well, you know, we don't need extension anymore. And I think, you know, I say to myself, that's a bunch of BS is what it is. We need extension today, more so than we've ever needed it. You know, it's been around for 100 years next year. We need it more so as we go forward than we've ever needed it before because of the complexity of the challenges that we have to deal with as well. And nutrient management. You know, we talk about nitrogen and phosphorus. Day before yesterday on CBS Evening News, if you watched it or read on the internet or whatever, talked about how the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico has become bigger, a lot more fish and fish kill and all that's happened, and attributable in part to the droughts, attributable in part to the nitrogen that was put in there, attributable in part because the plants were dying, they were not picking up the nitrogen. The nitrogen was going down the drain, literally, in those watersheds that got into the Mississippi, down into the Gulf of Mexico, and you got a bigger dead zone in that part of the world, right? So that's going on. We talk about that, and we talk about phosphorus and what it does in terms of eutrophication and, you know, on and on and on. But there's another little thing that's perking along here that needs to be of great concern to you and I, or what are called as reactive nitrogen species. These reactive nitrogen species, what they do is they go ahead, react. So reactive nitrogen species are positively charged. And then what they'll end up doing, or negatively charged as the case might be, what they do is they react with volatile organic compounds that we've got in the environment. How many of us in this room didn't spray on or splash on aftershave lotion or perfumes or whatever else that we've got of organic and origin? And that thing is being volatilized. And that is reacting with these reactive nitrogen species and produces ozone. We're not talking about the ozone on the North Pole, South Pole. We got that hole, you know, because of chlorofluorocarbons and all that. We're talking about ozone at the level of the Earth's atmosphere, as though we're on ground level, that's causing more cases of asthma in children and older people. So ozone is this thing that's perking along, that's causing some challenges for us from a health perspective that we all need to be very concerned about. So what's the contribution of agriculture to that? Reactive nitrogen comes from driving our automobiles and everything else too. Agriculture is a part of it. Animal agriculture, plant agriculture. This cities and towns are part of it. In our poop, we've got nitrogen and phosphorus and things like that that are also coming in and having an impact on contributing to the dead zones, contributing to eutrophication, contributing to ozone and all these health issues that we've got as well. I'm going to skip this. And those of you that do systems analysis, thinking, we desperately need life cycle analyses. We are, you know, that's the sort of the cradle to grave analysis of what happens so you can parse out where are these. You know, those of you that do food safety, there's a thing called HACCP, Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. And so what are the spots where you have holes in which you either lose or gain things, and how can you plug those things, whether it's from a climate change perspective or particulates or whatever else that you're thinking of. We desperately need that sort of an analysis to be done as well. So the most significant of these, really, the most immediate right now are all of these. Labor. You know, I throw that, and capital, and logistics. These are all abiotic constraints. You know, in our nation, we've not figured out how to deal with immigration and how to deal with the labor. Agriculture, particularly, is very deeply dependent on labor. And yet we do not have a common sense approach to dealing with it. If we don't do it, again, that's going to be another one of those constraints that's going to come back to bite our behinds and our inability or ability to go ahead and set the table and put food on the table for this population coming down the pike. Food waste and food loss. There's these graphics, the color coding tells you where food is lost or wasted in the developing countries of the world, in Africa and Asia and places like that. Almost half the food is lost before the dinner table. Before the dinner table, almost half the food. And in the developed countries like America and Western Europe, almost half the food is lost after the dinner table. But you know, these are data based on the proverbial back of the envelope calculations. We need some research done. This institution has a long history of helping with the before the dinner table piece of it. Long history globally as well. The post-harvest research work that has and education work that's been done at this institution. That's been slowly dissipating, not only at this institution, at other institutions as well. In fact, we don't even do a whole lot of work in the pre-harvest area. Post-harvest area, you know, what we, remember what we need is the shrink wraps, the sell by, use by dates. So human greed is such that you and I, if we go to the grocery store, Kroger's or Safeway or whatever you've got, and it says buy one, get 3 free. And human greed is such that you're going to go ahead and grab, oh man, this is a great deal because that's value for my money. You're going to go ahead, it might be for the price of 1 pound of bananas, you get 3 more pounds. So you're going to buy 4 pounds of bananas, you take it back to your home, and it just sits on the counter. Day 1 you eat a banana, day 2 you eat a banana, day 3 you eat a banana. By day 4 it starts turning dark, it gets the speckles on it. And then it attracts my good buddies, the fruit flies, the Drosophila flies coming in. And then by about day 6 or so you say, you know, maybe I should make some banana bread out of it. So you make a little banana bread, you give it to your neighbors and all that because you can't eat all the dang things. And then by about day 9, day 10, now suddenly you got to throw it in the trash can because now it's turned completely black and it's just like a swarm of flies flying around it. You throw it in the trash can. That gets picked up by your local waste hauler. He takes it to the landfill. He dumps it in there. That starts rotting. That produces nitrogen. That produces carbon. That's exacerbating climate change. And oh, by the way, all the water that went into it, all the labor that went into it, all the other things that went into to make that banana has now been lost down the tubes as well. So, you know, we really desperately need, and so we have to figure out how do we educate people not to, you know, fall prey to this greed that every one of us has. I do it, you do it, every one of us does it. Okay, how do you educate people? Or how do you develop shrink wrap technology? Or how do you take that can of milk, that gallon of milk, you know, that says, it says sell by whatever, August the 15th or whatever. And you see that, and you're drinking out of it, and it comes to August the 15th, and on maybe that day itself, or the 16th of August, you take that and pour the rest of it down the drain. Actually, you can go ahead and drink it for another 4 or 5 days beyond that, because you keep it in the refrigerator. You're not keeping it outside. But education of people, and if there are 2 dates, sell by, use by, that are 2 separate dates, so much more meaningful to a consumer. So where are our food scientists and food safety people that can go ahead and undertake that kind of research that we need as well? That's the sort of the things that we need. I mean, they might be at the margins, but they're going to have a huge impact over the longer term to be able to address these sorts of challenges that we've got. And in fact, you can address these. You know, we're talking about doubling food production. If you can cut that food waste and food loss by half, you can be there quite a ways. And you don't need to be growing that much more food to be able to feed the population in just a few more years. So that gives you a sense of the challenges and all constraints. I don't mean to leave you and say, "Oh, it's me. What am I going to do?" Sort of you know, the world is going to die and we're all going to be dead. Humanity is going to be gone and all that. I'm an optimist, and I think, you know, we've demonstrated. Humanity has demonstrated it, and I think America particularly has demonstrated it. In fact, when you're traveling on Interstate 70 or Interstate 80, that sign that says "One farmer feeds you and 150 others," that says something about the capabilities that we've got. Subtending that capability of the farmer are these institutions like this, Oklahoma State University and other land-grant universities. This amazing enterprise of discovering new knowledge, translating that into innovations, and delivering it through our extension service to the end users of, you know, in the form of solutions to the problems that they've got. We've got a demonstrable ability to do it. And so the idea really is to sort of corral that energy, that capability, the transformative approaches that we've developed, and thinking, you know, farther out than where we are at right now. That is on a grant cycle or on a publication cycle that we end up having within academic communities, because now our administrators that are sitting here that say to a young person like Samantha here, she's brand new, you got to go chase down those grants and get those publications and all that, and you're going to get tenured. And so she's worried about that next grant, about that next publication. Instead, what if we said, Samantha, we love having you here. We're going to provide you an environment that's going to nurture you, your ability to develop your academic credentials, and at the same time, it's also protecting our global interests as well, of feeding the world, etc. I mean, you know, it's a very different construct. And then helping her make the connections on campus, outside of campus, and bringing in all the resources necessary. And that makes her also that much more effective at seeking out those grants and getting those papers and things like that too. Oh, by the way, not necessarily have to be the primary author or the first author, which is how we do it. You know, we say, oh yeah, I'm for transdisciplinary approach. I'm not accusing you guys of this happening, but having lived in there in academia, I know this. I'm all for transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, blah, 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 blah. But when it comes time for me to evaluate her on her tenure and promotion, I want to start counting off how many first authored papers do you have? And how many sole authored papers do you have? How many grants did you get that you're the sole PI on it? Whereas the enterprise that she's trying to address takes this global village to pull together. So how do we change the evaluation systems that we've got as well? And these are things that we need to be thinking of in an academic context, and when we're thinking about the global context. But in terms of the paths forward, there are a number of opportunities for us. In terms of farming systems, you know, if I said farming to anybody on the street, they have, particularly if they're Americans, they have this Norman Rockwell picture of this pastoral scene with the beautiful rolling hills, with one or two cows in the background, and there's a beautiful red barn, and that's the image that everybody has. Or a fellow sitting on typically it's a guy sitting on a tractor or something like that. That's the image that we've got. And that has not changed in the last 10 to 15,000 years, by the way. I mean, we are doing agriculture today very similar to what we did 10 to 15,000 years ago. Then we selected plants for certain characteristics. Now we select plants. Maybe we hasten that process using molecular tools. Maybe we can put in traits that we want to from other places. But in general, you take a seed, you stick it in the dirt, you pour some water, a plant grows up, you harvest it, you keep some, you eat some, you plant some more for the next year. That's pretty much it. So what are the new transformative possibilities? I'll focus on just a couple of things in this here. This productivity gap. And again, our agricultural economist friends are really good at thinking these sorts of, from a systems perspective, of helping us think this through. This growth rate per year that needs to happen to be able to put food on the table in the year 2050 for this population coming up. Currently, we're at about 1.5%. It's not sustainable. It's just not going to meet the demand that you've got coming down the pike in 30 to 40 years. And they say at a minimum, you got to get it up to about 2% per year to be able to get it there. So what's that going to take for us to be able to do that? What's the genetics that we need? What's the investments that we need to be making in terms of research investments and education investments as well? And that's what that productivity gap is all about. Integrated and diversified systems. In countries like Israel, they've done an amazing job. This is nothing new, by the way. In fact, if you go to the pharaohs in their tombs, you see integrated farming systems images as well. And so it's reinventing what we've known, you know, back to the future, as it were. And in Israel, what they do is they've integrated, you know, fish culture, irrigation, you know, vegetable production, and they do this in the Negev, in the desert, not where, you know, you've got this lush land with a lot of water and things like that that we have here in America and most parts of America. That's what they do. What's that next iteration of that diversified, integrated farming system that we need? Smart farming is another area that desperately is waiting for some really smart people to come along and figure out. Imagine that you got a Roomba-like device, that one that goes around vacuum cleaning your home. You know, you can do it from your smartphone these days, by the way. Imagine a Roomba-like device that's out in the field that's picking up all the environmental signals about water, about nitrogen, about phosphorus, about insects, about pathogens, because it's chock full of signals out there. It's picking it up and then transmitting it to you. You're maybe sitting at a bar or a wine bar in Paris, and with your iPhone or a smartphone, you're able to trigger that to go ahead and trigger the appropriate corrective actions to be taking place as well. You know, today we can sit here in the States, in this part of the country, you can sit in a combine, punch in the coordinates and kick back and let that thing go back and forth for you in that combine. But it's that next iteration of it. What are the sentinels that we need? What's the robotics that we need? What are the biomems devices that we need? The biological, mechanical, electromechanical systems that can marry the engineers with the biologists and bring these new tools, these new sentinels. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm thinking of smart farming. And issues pertaining to aquaponics, hydroponics, vertical farming. And I think personally, these are all okay. They're part of our portfolio, our suite of capabilities. But at the end of the day, we still need horizontal farming to take place. We can't get away from it, because everybody needs to have calories, everybody needs to have protein, everybody needs to have nutrients as well. And you can grow some of those in these alternative systems, but to be able to put food on the table for that billions more is going to continue to take that very traditional Norman Rockwell agricultural system as well. So we're not going to get away from it anytime soon. We need, you know, again, things in the policy area, in the regulation area, issues pertaining to governance and poverty reduction, and this term glocalization, you know, the idea about act locally, think globally. Anything that you do here, going back to that butterfly effect that I was talking about, anything and everything that you do here is going to have an impact globally as well. And then vice versa. How do you juxtapose those two things, and what sort of policies do you need that you're doing something locally that has a global impact, or vice versa? And again, you know, a lot of different kind of thinking that we need to be brought to bear if we're thinking about this, these paths forward in addressing these constraints that we've got. In terms of discoveries, I'll talk a little bit about virtual water and then the fast-track breeding. Oops. And logistics and things like that. But fast-track breeding. And fast-track breeding is this guy named Chris Dardick. He's with the Agricultural Research Service and his colleagues in West Virginia. They came out with a pretty nifty way. You know, he's a plum breeder. Plum trees to breed takes 25 to 30 years. Okay? In the career of a tree breeder, you might do one set and you're out. It's over, you know? And so what he's figured out is he's taken this early flowering gene from poplars. Poplars go very fast, as you know, and created a transgenic in plum, okay? And then he takes that and incorporates the traits that he wants to from plum itself into that plant. He back crosses to plum itself, and in 3 generations, the poplar one is kicked out. So it's no longer a transgenic, but he's able to get plum tree varieties in 4 to 5 years versus 25 to 30 years. It's called fast-track breeding. Pretty cool discovery. In the world of cereals, for example, there's a technology called double haploid, and that's happening here at this campus, particularly in the ARS labs. They take corn pollen and fertilize wheat flowers with corn pollen. And going back to basic genetics, and sex, you get 2 sets of haploid chromosomes from your 2 parents, and you get a diploid situation. Right? That's the normal. And then during meiosis, it splits up. You get 2 haploids, and then again that cycle continues on. And so when you take corn pollen and fertilize wheat, it triggers. They don't know what the reason is. Haploid wheat seed to be produced. And then they go in and pop that embryo that's inside of that wheat seed, the haploid one, and transfer into it a diploid embryo and continue that breeding forward, and it gives them the traits that they want and hastens the process. Where a wheat breeder would take to get germplasm take about half a dozen years, and varieties would take 12 years, now they can get germplasm in 1 year and varieties in about 3 years. Imagine how quickly you're able to do this, because some smart guy, Chenggen Chu, he's in Manhattan, Kansas, he figured this out and came up with this transformative approach that cuts down on the time needed. It's transgenic initially, but it gets kicked out because you're removing that embryo out and putting back in. There's something about the epigenetics that is modified. This is epigenetics for those of you that are not biologists. Genetics is what you derive in your DNA. Epigenetics is everything outside of that in a very simple manner. Some interesting things that are going on, and again we need some really transformative things to be done in that area. Oh, the reason I went through this, research investments. There's a pretty clear correlation between the amount of investments that we've made in research, this one, this former Soviet Union, 0.6%, and you know where they're at in terms of being able to feed themselves in the world. They're a net importer of food, all those countries. And then the United States used to be ahead of the pack in the investments that we made, and we're down at 1.6%. Countries like Belgium and Australia are ahead of us. They're about 5.5%. China is going to surpass them in 2 more years. India is fast behind, going to surpass. And here in the States, we're continuing to disinvest in the enterprises that we've got. There's a clear correlation. If we're about going ahead and feeding that population and staying globally preeminent, then we better wake up and smell the coffee and start investing in the discoveries that need to be made as well. Last thing I want to talk about is the education and education pipeline. So it's not only the discoveries, the translation of those discoveries and the delivery, but the education piece of it as well. And there are 4 domains in my mind that we need to be thinking of as we're projecting out and setting this table. Those domains are the workforce. These are the undergraduate students that come through, and also community college kids that come through. They get an education and they find jobs. Right now, we provided funding to George Washington University and Purdue University to do a survey. In the next 5 years, there's going to be 60,000 jobs in the broadly defined food and agricultural enterprise. Collectively, all of the land grant and others that teach these subjects are generating less than half that number per year. We got lots of jobs that are going to be going by the wayside. Agribusinesses are not going to be able to fill these positions. And they're trying to get bio majors and business majors and others to develop the skills to get into this enterprise as well. So I think, it's really, we need to be very concerned about this aspect of it as well. Second area is the scientific cadre. Another survey that was done by what's called as the Coalition for Sustainable Agricultural Workforce. They surveyed all the companies like Dow AgroSciences, Monsanto, ADM, Cargill, and all that. In the next 2 years, postdocs and PhD students, listen to this, in the next 2 years, they need 1,100 scientists. These companies, 1,100. We're nowhere near being able to provide that number. I think, again, we're about half to 2/3 that if we were pushing it really hard. And they're very concerned. So Hugh Grant, the CEO of Monsanto, and others are very, very concerned that they're not meeting their needs. So what are they going to do? They're going to go ahead and import. And that's what the conversation is about, visas and immigration in this country as well. And that's happening in the agricultural world. Third one is the extension cadre. We've lost in the United States about a third of that footprint across, Oklahoma and North Dakota and Wyoming in some ways are blessed because of what you've got. And the rest of the country has lost that extension cadre. That's the boots on the ground that's able to deliver that knowledge to the producers, the end users. And we've lost that. And we got to be very concerned. What kind of education are we going to offer? One of the things that we're going to do in my agency, we hope in next year, we hope, is to develop, how NSF does REUs, research experiences for undergraduates? We want to create a program called Research and Extension Experiences for Undergraduate. So that the kids coming through colleges of agriculture will get skills in both of those domains, not just, becoming scientists. Okay? And the last one is, of course, the producers, the people that actually grow those crops as well. I talked about that at the outset. I'm not going to spend any time on it. Okay? The Morrill Act, again, you can step back and say, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? What do you do and all that? Again, hearkening back to our DNA, where these land-grant universities come from. That DNA, that's the Morrill Act, by the way, the Land-Grant Act. It had 3 expectations. It said foundational knowledge. This is what Justin Smith Morrill said and others said. Foundational knowledge in the humanities and sciences. These are the 3 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, physics, chemistry, etc. Everybody's got to have that. It doesn't matter what your enterprise is, but everyone has to have knowledge of that. Built on top of it is practical education in the agricultural and mechanic arts. Experiential education, we call that today. Internships and externships and co-ops and things like that. And then military leadership. Not so much, learning how to shoot guns as much as communication skills and critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills and things of that nature. That's leadership. And in modern verbiage, we call this cognitive skills, all the technical skills, and non-cognitive skills. And these both have to be coming together. And if we do that right, then you're going to have a path forward in meeting that extension cadre, in meeting that scientific cadre, in meeting that workforce cadre, in meeting those producers as well. So what are the characteristics of this educational enterprise as you project out, if you're going to set that table as you go forward? The cognitive skills are all the technical skills, and you got to have that. You got to be in order to do really great transdisciplinary work, you got to have deep disciplinary knowledge. If you don't have deep disciplinary knowledge, you're not going to be able to do that transdisciplinary work. So we've got to make sure that the animal sciences and the entomology and the plant pathology and the plant sciences are teaching those subjects really deep knowledge of that hands-on experiential education and things like that. And enrichment. That is, we're going to talk about language skills. If you are a graduate getting a degree in horticulture, you go work for some company or orchard or whatever, the people that are going to do, as a manager, the people that are going to do the hard work are going to come from south of the border. And they're going to speak in Spanish. And you only know English. And you're not able to communicate with the people that you're working with. If you're working in a dairy, it's the same situation. Any agricultural enterprise, that's the same situation that you've got. You're not able to communicate. Back in the good old days, there's a number of people here with gray hair or no hair. Used to be that you were required to have language skills. And we walked away from it. And how do you reinvigorate that sort of a thing? Issues pertaining to experiential education, co-ops. These co-ops, engineering colleges figured this out maybe a decade ago. They require a student that's going to engineering college to spend a semester or 2 at some company or some enterprise where they're learning hands-on skills. So it takes them away from school. Oh, by the way, they get paid while they do that too. Oh, by the way, it allows them to figure out to get a job at that same company that might be at. So what do we do within the agricultural disciplines of thinking, well, there's a kid that's coming through, we're in this mode that, okay, we're going to have a kid come in 4 years or 6 years out here, she's going to graduate, but if they take time off, what happens? Where are they going to get the wherewithal to be able to finish out their degree? And these are questions that need to be dealt with, and very, very quickly. And then we got the non-cognitive skills. And that's everything from leadership and critical problem solving, independent thinking skills, communication skills, and last but not least, helping students develop the ability to compromise. You know, if you look at what's happening, particularly in Washington, D.C., in America, we don't have a way to compromise and come together in a way that's a very thoughtful process. We've lost that ability. I think we need to go back to our DNA and reestablish that sort of a thing. How do you do that? There is a way of developing those skills. It's not something that you are born with, or it's not something that you just happens just like that. It's something that you learn. And I think there's a great opportunity for us as we're thinking about a curricula of this 21st century that in order to put the food on the table, we're thinking of that as well. And I'm going to run through this very quickly. Humans, of course, matter, particularly this nexus of the biophysical and the social science, not just as an afterthought. Oh, by the way, as Mike was telling me in his pickup truck, that token economist or that token social scientist or whatever on that grant proposal, but they're sitting front and center in the driver's seat, maybe driving the questions they're asking. In fact, they're unbelievable systems thinkers. And entomologists and plant pathologists and crop scientists and soil scientists listen up and go and have a conversation with those social scientists, because they're going to be able to share with you the systems thinking that could go into making your grant proposals also that much more effective and be successful. We've seen how spikes in food prices, here's what's happened to food prices, has resulted in this. In 2007, 2008, unbelievable riots. You remember the Arab Spring that happened here just a couple of years ago? That young man from Tunisia, in Tunis, Bouazi is the young man's name. He went to his, he's a food vendor himself, and went to get his stuff to sell as a street vendor. And the price had shot up on the flatbread that they eat in Tunisia. And he said, why are you doing this to me? And he went and he burned himself to death. And that is the tipping point that got the Arab Spring going. And so that's what President Obama talks about, is that if we don't do something about it right now, the food prices are going to escalate, and this is nothing. If this thing continues to go up, this is just going to be a small microcosm. This particular thing occurred. It was in Cameroon, it was in Rome, it was in Mexico City, it was in Cairo, it was all over the world this was happening back 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And it's perking, you know, it's like a coffee percolator, it's perking, and something's going to explode if we don't watch out of the kinds of things that we need as well. So that gives you a sense of what's going on. And really, as you've sat here for almost 1 hour now, there's a clock that's been ticking. And in fact, I had this current world population thing ticking there. That number is ticking away. And it's an interesting, daunting thing to think of. That it just, as I'm talking to you in the last few seconds, that number has been ticking and ticking and up. What are we going to do in terms of the discoveries that we make, those transformative discoveries? What are we going to do in terms of the translations that we need and the delivery systems that we're going to have? And what do we do about educating young people as well? It's collectively in our hands. Thank you very much.
Take a few questions?
Yeah, sure. I'm game. I'm game.
All right, so we've got time for just a few questions. Please, we've got to move them on out. Questions for Dr. Ramaswamy?
And I know some of you, not all of you, introduce yourself too, please. And even the ones that I know, introduce yourself, because others may not know who you are and where you come from, what department, if you're a student or a postdoc or a faculty member. Okay, come on. I thought, there you go. Who are you and where are you from? Yeah, but you're in entomology here? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Chris is in entomology. Yep. All right. I skipped over that. You saw there's a big data in there, tucked in. Big data is where it's at right now because everything is all data driven. I was reading in the paper the other day, well over 200 billion sensors at any moment collecting data. In fact, my 2 iPhones, as I've been here talking in the last hour, is pinging and collecting data and things like that. And genomics and metagenomics and biometrics and econometrics and on and on, all these sensors that we've got. So what we're trying to do is to get our arms around it. The Office of Science and Technology Policy, this is the group of advisors to the President of the United States, has come up with, in fact, John Holdren, the President's advisor, sent a note to all of us. In fact, it was shared with, I hope you read it, Chris, because it was shared with all the, I know it went to the VPR's office, it went to the Provost's office here, and to the deans and others as well. Talks about a plan forward. We are supposed to provide, each federal agency is supposed to provide a plan forward and an implementation approach and a policy approach on August the 26th or 22nd is the deadline. We have to have that plan in place. Then we're going to put that on the Federal Register, have you provide input on it and how we go forward. Actually, I'm very concerned about this. Back of the proverbial envelope calculations, I asked Simon Liu to do, because we got to make publications available and data available, open access. And on publications, it'll cost us per publication to make that available in perpetuity, $100 per publication. NIFA, just NIFA, provides funding for about 10 to 15,000 publications per year, $1 million to $1.5 million that we have no clue where it's going to come from. On the data part of it, NIH did a proverbial back of the envelope calculation. NIH says in 2 more years, in order to make data available, need $100 million per year. Okay, they're 15 times as much as we are. So you can do the math. My budget is 1.2 billion. Theirs is 31 billion. They're 25 times as big as we are, actually. And so we need per year about $4 to $5 million just to make that data available. Who's going to pay for it? This guy will tell me that, well, we may have to renegotiate the FNA, the Facilities and Administration Overhead cost. Absolutely, why not? Oklahoma State University cannot afford to pay for that. And so he'll say, renegotiate with your cognizant agencies, NIH probably, and instead of it being 48% or 45% or 52% or whatever it is, he might say we're going to up it by 1% or 0.5% or whatever to cover this cost. But there's the cost of storing it, curating it, rendering it, visualizing it, making it available. Who puts the pipelines that you need to shove this thing down the pipe? There's no business plan yet. I've been pushing, I need a business plan before I can go forward on this. In fact, I had conversations with John Holdren, Dr. Holdren, and he's cognizant of that as well. And right now, it's a very scary proposition. There's a lot of data, but we want to make that data available. Todd Park, the President's Chief Technology Advisor, Todd did a Datapalooza in the biomedical area about a month ago. Several thousand people showed up drooling because they could see the data that the federal government has with the money that's been provided. Already, about 6 companies have been created based on that look at that data, and that they're now seeking venture capital in the agricultural area. I'd like to have an agri-data-palooza as well. But it requires you to be able to provide that data to me. Now you're asking me the question, so how am I going to make that data available? Who's going to pay for that? And all these questions. We've really not come to grips about it yet. There is a huge revolution going on in the realm of data and what it can do. There's incredible amounts of data, particularly if you're even just simply genomics. What an Illumina sequencer can do for you today. Illumina says, by the way, this company that does genome sequencing, they say that if they want to look at data rather than storing it, they just do another sequence and then grab the data that they want, because it's cheaper for them to do it that way than to store that data, archive it, curate it, make it available, and have the pipes and all that to send that data down too. So that's the challenge that we've got. We're just getting inundated and drowned in all this data. Don't know what to do. So you might have some smart young people here that might know what to do with all that data that's available. And there's money available, by the way. So one of the things that we're hoping, and we're going to partner with NSF particularly, and NIH as well. One of the areas that we want to invest in is, the sort of the cyber infrastructure and the data part of it. Not so much the gathering of it as much as it is the curation, making available, rendering, visualization, and things like that too. I think there's going to be some pretty cool possibilities coming down the pike. Yeah.
Gerald Horn, Animal Science Department. Very interesting presentation. What kind of conversations are occurring with the USDA or NIFA with regard to the huge issue of research investment?
In general or in animal science?
In general, for the country as a whole,
Yeah.
or even at
Yeah.
state level?
Yeah. Yeah, that consumes my days is conversations about research investment and how do we make that compelling argument to Congress particularly, and of course to the Office of Management and Budget, the President's Office of Management and Budget, because the process is we have to convince them and then it goes out and then convince Congress as well. So I think, at least based on the hearings that we've had in the recent past, in the last couple of months, I think we have the appearance of some success. We asked for a 30% increase in competitive grants funding, and the Senate has proposed for 2014 to give us a 10% increase, and we asked, and then the House has proposed to give a 12 or 13% increase in the Senate, and about a 6% increase in the House. But we do that by using the knowledge that you provide us, the information that you provide us. We're a well-kept secret, and I was having this conversation with Mike and Jim and Jonathan and others this morning, that we need help. Not just at the federal level, but also at the local level. There's a group of entomologists that is heading off to go to Washington D.C. and the question that I was asked earlier today was, what's the message we need to give? I said, tie it all back down to that person's district, their backyard. Don't talk about climate change, about some poor slob in Africa that you want to feed. Not that they're not interested in feeding them, but right now they're interested in what's happening in their backyards. And that is at the state level as well as the federal level as well. And all of us collectively, we need to be armed with and arming people like our Vice President for Research or the deans and others to be able to take that story and carry that forward as well. It's not enough for you to be doing your research, your science and all that. Become engaged. Within the rules of engagement that you've got in engaging with congressional reps and legislators and all that, engage with them, share the stories, go to those places. And if you do something in the genomics area, go ahead and translate that into something that's understandable, not some jargon, that people don't understand. What's it mean that you did this genomic sequencing of a particular plant or a critter or whatever? At the end of the day, what's that mean to that individual? That's what's going to carry a lot of weight. That's the conversation that I have. And again, I'm pushing and prodding and cajoling people to give me. One last question. Go ahead, please. Yeah, well, the answer is yes, indeed. And, some of you may have read this essay from the Heritage Foundation that came out here about a couple of 3 weeks ago that basically calls for NIFA and ARS to be essentially shut down because allegedly NIFA and ARS are preventing private enterprise from realizing their full potential in making these great discoveries. Well, private enterprise, what Monsanto is going to do is where the money's at. They're going to work on corn, on cotton, and soybeans, and maybe some other things. They're not going to work on all the other myriad things that we work on pest management, on developing new tools, on nutrition, on water, on irrigation, and on and on. There's a whole bunch of things that they will not work on. And so even they'll tell you they need that public investments to take place for that work to be done, and then they can partner. So we have to partner, there's no doubt about it. And I like to, when I testified in Congress, I talked about crowdsourcing the best monetary and intellectual resources together. You know, we need to bring those two together. And what we'd like to do is to create this ecosystem, as it were. I use the word innovation ecosystem, stole that from the computer industry. That innovation ecosystem that allows the creation of a sandbox that where you can bring in private and public to play. And some institutions academic institutions have had tremendous success in that, where then parts of it can be spun off into proprietary areas, but much of it stays in the public domain as well. And who owns the IP in that context? I mean, these are questions that need to be dealt with. In Congress, there's a community that recognizes it, says, yeah, let's do it that way. And there's a community that says, you know, forget about public investments. We need to just get rid of public investments in all of these enterprises. Public investments need to be only for the military and a few other things. And I didn't do it, but I was reminded of Napoleon's famous statement, you know, that an army marches on its stomach, right? And that stomach needs to be taken care of as well. And that's what this enterprise allows us to do. So again, it's in many ways, you know, to paraphrase Pogo, you know, I've seen the enemy and it's us. And we've not been able to convey this message of why this is important at a gut level to people, the taxpayers, to understand why this enterprise is very important. Okay.
So